Okay. Did we do a mic check? Okay, it is. Let's open a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for the gift of prophecy that you have given us so that we can use the guidance in your word to make sense of the times in which we live. Pray that you will watch over us this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today, I'm going to title this All Messed Up, because the world really is a mess. I have used the title Convergence a number of times, and I thought that was being overused. I've tried to modify it a little bit here and there, but I'm also concerned, but we do talk each week about the convergence of events and all the things that are prophesied in the scripture. Some of those that's sort of a historical and future representation of some of the things that are discussed in the Bible, many of which relate to, for example, Noah's Ark there. The days of Noah relate to the end times, or a picture or pattern of the end times. And some of the things that are very, very important. And the second end from the upper left is the Cave of Machpelah at Hebron, which is kind of the one of the flashpoints in the conflict between Israel and the Arabs over that particular site, where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah are buried. And it's one of the most important historical sites in Israel. But so there's just this convergence. It seems like everything is in play. I also thought I almost titled my update today, Concatenation, which means a series of interconnected things or events. That's clearly the type of world that we live in today. Here's a graphic, for example, that shows the interrelationship between different parties in the Middle East and major countries in the world. So, for example, you'll see the United States on the left, and wherever there's a green line, they have a good relationship with that particular country. And these things change all the time. But this is just one little example of how everything is interconnected. I could do a similar graphic for all of the different groups, Islamic State and all the different terror groups and other organizations in the Middle East and countries and how they interrelate. And it's pretty clear that whenever you try to go down and explain how everything is connected today, you might start with a couple of straight lines, but you pretty much end up with a bowl of spaghetti at the end, because everything is interwoven and very complex. But it certainly is a very disrupted world. I'm going to open today with a couple passage of scripture that I think sort of sets the stage for some of the things I want to talk about today, which of course are all related to COVID, the economy, Middle East, and things that are happening. So I want to, so I'll start with some passages in Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Now, it's very interesting what Daniel does here. And this is another example of how Scripture relates to other parts of Scripture. Somebody once described the Bible as the first hyperlinked book ever written, because you have 66 books by roughly 40 different authors. As my friend Chuck Missler used to say, 66 books by 40 authors, and yet it's all connected, and that's exactly right. So when you see a passage here like Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, Daniel is clearly alluding back to the passage in Jeremiah chapter 30, talking about the time of Jacob's trouble. There shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. Jesus also references the same type of language in Matthew chapter 24 in the Olivet Discourse. So my view is, just to be clear, is that the time of Jacob's trouble and the Great Tribulation occur after the middle of the 70th week, which Jesus identifies as the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24, verse 15. And then down about verse 21 or 22, he says, and then shall be a time of great tribulation. That time of great tribulation follows the abomination of desolation that he referenced in Matthew 24, verse 15. I know that's some people disagree with that, and that's okay. I'm always and I think people are entitled to disagree with me and be wrong. But I do think that the connection, the description of the language, a time of trouble such as there never was, relates to Jeremiah chapter 30, the time of Jacob's trouble. It is a time, I think in that passage, it says a time like no other, and the Great Tribulation. But I think this is important in these rest of these verses in Daniel chapter 12. And there are also similar verses in Daniel chapter 11. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. Daniel 12, verse 4. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Now, a lot of times there's, I think, a surface meaning of that passage, which talks about just general knowledge and information will be increased in the end times. And when you look, I used to do legal presentations on data and discovery and the exponential growth that has happened in the number of how much information is available. When I was a young attorney 40 years ago, starting 40 years ago this month, we would have a case and we would have, file folders and red wells full of documents for a case. But now it's not uncommon to work on cases where the documents, if they're on paper, are stored in a warehouse. And when we sometimes use the illustration of when we're producing documents to tell the judge how much we have to go through, we will say things like, I think we did in a recent case, the documents that we've produced thus far, Judge, would fill 86 semi-trucks full of paper, floor to ceiling, the full length of the trailer. So that's one thing, but the deeper meaning, I think, is that people will go back and forth through the book, and at the end, the book will be unsealed and people will have a better idea of what's happening. I've used the example of an eye chart. I'm nearsighted, and if I look at an eye chart with no glasses, it's just fuzzy. I can tell there are letters there, but I can't tell the details. But as I get closer to the chart, everything comes into focus, even being nearsighted, and I can see it. And I think that's a pretty good illustration of how these prophetic passages will be interpreted as we get closer to the time of the end, that people will have a better understanding. And this is exactly what Daniel chapter 12, verse 9 says, continuing with the passage. And he said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." And that the wicked shall not, none of the wicked shall understand, I think is tied in part to the passage in Romans chapter 1, where Paul says that there's a judgment that comes on them. They're given over to a reprobate mind. They are unable to reason. And I think we see that a lot today. And one of the characteristics of the end times is the lack of ability to understand. Now, I'm going to use an example that I think is, it's a legal example, but I think it's relevant to this discussion about people not being able to understand. Now, in saying this, certainly I have a political viewpoint, and I don't try to hide that. But I want to show this for what it is and what's happening in our legal system. And that relates to the case of General Michael Flynn. As you know, he was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He had worked in the Obama administration, and then he was hired by the Trump administration. And I think the record is pretty clear now that when he was hired by the Trump administration, people within the FBI and the Justice Department and the CIA and the Obama White House, all the way including one of the top advisors to the president, Susan Rice, and Vice President Joe Biden, they started doing things like Flynn talked to a Russian ambassador. And this was done during the transition time when you would expect that the new president and his staff were getting familiar with people and talking to them. Now, there were some things that the Obama administration was trying to shove through at the end when they were lame ducks, particularly the not exercising the veto at the UN over Jerusalem, division of Jerusalem, that took place around Christmas in 2016. But they also were using the National Security Agency and other devices within the government for improper purposes. And one of them was to get General Flynn and, by extension, Donald Trump. So they got General Flynn, they got him, he wasn't arrested, he was interviewed, told, don't worry about it, you don't need an attorney. And he said some things that were not truthful, and then they decided they're going to destroy General Flynn. And so for the last almost 3.5 years, General Flynn, he was forced to resign pretty early on in the Trump administration. He's used up all of his life savings. They threatened him with jail. He agreed to plead guilty. But as things have come out, as things have been investigated, it was pretty clear that the unmasking was improper. The entire investigation that was done by the FBI was a sham. There was no basis to think that a crime had been committed. And they made a whole bunch of things up. But nevertheless, they indicted General Flynn, and his case has been pending now for 3 years. He had a big law firm in Washington, D.C., Covington and Burling. Huge law firm. I've been in their offices. They represented him, advised him to plead guilty. He did. But he eventually hired Sidney Powell. And she was able to come in, wanted to withdraw the plea. And as Attorney General Barr appointed some people to look into the situation that was going on, I'm being very superficial on my analysis here, but General Barr appointed a special attorney. It's not associated with the criminal part of the Department of Justice to look into things, evaluate it, and the recommendation was that the case be dropped. So the defense, now headed up by Sidney Powell, who's an appellate lawyer from Dallas, and another law firm in D.C., they entered into an agreement with the federal government to drop the case and have the case dismissed, and filed a motion with the judge, Sullivan, in the district court for the District of Columbia District Court, federal court. And Judge Sullivan he's an Obama appointee, and he decided that he's not going to let the case be dismissed. He's going to keep Flynn twisting, and he has come up with some of the, in my view, some of the most ridiculous one of the most ridiculous rulings I've ever seen. The prosecution wants to drop the case, the defense wants the case dropped, and now this man has decided he's going to insert himself in the thing. And so maybe it was last Friday or Monday, he issued this order. This is usually done in a minute entry in the court docket. And in this minute entry, he said this: ordered that the court exercises its inherent authority to appoint the Honorable John Gleeson, a retired district court judge, as amicus curiae, friend of the court, to present arguments and oppositions to the government's motion to dismiss. Ordered that the amicus curiae, the retired Judge Gleeson, shall address whether the court should issue an order to show cause why Mr. Flynn should not be held in contempt. And it is clear that the judge is overreaching. Now, Flynn's attorneys filed a motion with the court. There was also an attempt by a number of people. They called themselves the former Watergate prosecutors. There were 2,000 former federal Department of Justice attorneys who signed this petition. The Watergate prosecutors moved to intervene, and Sidney Powell and her team filed this this motion to strike it. And then in the yellow highlighted text, you can find all of this online, all court documents. After an indictment is unsealed, it's always available online. There's never a case where it's not. And when somebody's arrested, or all the people in a conspiracy are arrested, then the indictment will be unsealed. But in the minute entry, Sidney Powell notes that, or the Flynn defense team notes that on 24 occasions in the Flynn case, Judge Sullivan had been presented with people seeking to intervene in the case and file friend of the court pleadings to instruct the court in how the court should act or what should be done. In 24 out of 24 of those cases, Judge Sullivan said, no, you have no reason to do this. The court is the one that controls this case. Outside parties have no interest. It's only the defense and the prosecution. And in 24 out of 24 such instances, he denied the motion. Now, Sidney Powell was interviewed about this on Lou Dobbs. I'm going to kind of jump into the middle of it. I'm going to play a little bit at the beginning to kind of set it up, then I'll advance a few minutes into it and we can watch what she has to say. By the way, you can go to sydneypowell.com and you can find a memo that she wrote. And I think if you really want to kind of understand what's going on, it's incredibly well written. Sidney Powell is a brilliant lawyer. And so she wrote a memo to Barack Obama because Obama came out and said, yeah, they're dismissing this case. We are concerned about the rule of law. Now, in the case of former President Obama and his staff, my view is that if hypocrisy was water, the world would drown. So here's a little bit of Sidney Powell on Lou Dobbs talking about this particular matter.
Senator Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham is quite a fellow. I'll just leave it there. He doesn't have the courage to call out Obamagate for what it is. Take a look at his outrage on the deep state and radical Dems' efforts to overthrow President Trump.
I find it unbelievable that the outgoing administration is surveilling the incoming administration. That is incredibly wrong, at the minimum, unethical.
Unethical, my goodness. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted about the senator's timid response, saying, quote, "We need more doers like Richard Grenell and a lot less talkers. We've got more than our share of talkers when you talk tough on TV every night, but do none of what you talk about. People do notice and lose patience. Enough BS. Do your jobs." Well said, Don. That's all I can say about that. The judiciary branch, as big a part of this corruption as any executive branch, agency, or department, Judge Emmett Sullivan wants to hear from outside legal groups before ruling on whether to drop charges against General Michael Flynn. Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell, says Judge Sullivan has denied any filings by outside parties 24 times. That is until the government moved to dismiss the case. She says that we all know exactly where this is coming from. To guide us through this, joining us tonight is Sidney Powell, former federal prosecutor and defense attorney for none other than General Flynn. Sidney, great to have you with us. Your comments, as usual, are spot on, and you identify much of the issue. This is to see these names. These are some of the top officials of only missing is President Obama's, frankly, when you go through the list of the White House. This is stunning stuff. You had to be even surprised the vice president, the chief of staff of the White House, are on that list.
Well, actually, no, Lou. Unfortunately, I was not surprised. There are some names I wasn't expecting because it goes a lot more broadly than I realized, like people in the Treasury Department and all of that. But what I find particularly interesting is we have to look back at April 2015 when Sally Yates came into the Department of Justice. That's only a month after Mr. Trump announced his intention to seek the presidency. She immediately shut out the Inspector General from the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. And then, as I mentioned last night, before Loretta Lynch left office, around the middle of December, she and Clapper greatly expanded the reach of the intel community's daily briefings to a lot more people. If you put those in the timeline of the unmaskings and the Strzok Page text messages, it puts a lot of pieces of the puzzle together.
This flurry, 15th and 16 December 2016, we saw a lot of bizarre reporting based on, obviously, intelligence sources during that time. But to see this flurry from, as you say, broadly across the administration, we had ambassadors, we had the UN ambassador, the chief of staff, for crying out loud. Their interest in this was fevered. It's inexplicable to me that so many people would be contemporaneously asking for an unmasking, which is a rare behavior for any public official, even in outside the intelligence agencies.
Yes, to put that in perspective, in his entire 33 years in the military, including as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Flynn only unmasked one American, and that was because he was talking to a Middle Eastern terrorist in the Middle East at the time. And this entire scenario is absolutely atrocious. It's criminal. The more they found that General Flynn was innocent of anything, the more evidence the FBI came across that exonerated him of anything, the harder they worked to set him up for whatever they could make up against him, including all of the unmaskings that you see and how widely it went.
Well, it's so broad,
and they intensified the smear campaign
at the same time. Absolutely.
Yes.
But to broadly,
yes, and that's when they started escalating the smear campaign.
Right, and to so broadly and feverishly deepen this request for unmasking of General Flynn. It makes it it's on its face. It is political. It is driven purely by politics. It's extraordinary. Your thoughts about why the judge is not reacting to this instead of a dog whistle from a former president, and suddenly Judge Sullivan is a friend of Friends of the Court briefs.
Well, of course, this is just broken. I haven't even had a chance to study it all myself. Hopefully the judge will see what is actually going on here and respond accordingly. There are all kinds of legal issues that are raised by the order that he entered yesterday requesting brief of amici, and we intend to address those fully in whatever forum is most appropriate.
What forum can you anticipate? Judge Sullivan is looking foolish here, as well as incompetent because he has had a fraudulent case in front of him now for how many years? And he has not interceded and said to the prosecution, you're trying to defraud my court, and I take that personally. But that has not been his response. It has been to be complicit with the prosecutors in carrying out a travesty against General Flynn.
Well, it's been going on for 3 years now, as you know. It's only since last June that the truth has started coming to light with the filings our team has made. And I really thought that he of all people, who is the judicial hero of my book, License to Lie from 2014, would have gone and been very aggressive about the prosecution's Brady violations. But so far, he's adopted the government's position on everything, and that can't keep standing in light of all the Brady violations that are disclosed by the government within the last 10 days to 2 weeks.
So when she talks about Brady violations, just so you know, there's the Brady rule in federal criminal prosecutions, and essentially it says that the government has an ethical, legal obligation to turn over to the defense anything that might exonerate the defendant. Now, having been through some of these cases before, generally the stock answer from the federal prosecutors is, well, there is no Brady material. That's why we indicted the person. And then they will do things like when they were ordered, a case I was working on, they said, okay, well, we will identify the documents that might be Brady material. And we got a spreadsheet that was 2,750 pages long with about 40 entries on each page of documents that were located in boxes in a warehouse. And, just to print off we put a 1 page of documents we were able to find on a pallet and brought it to the judge. So this is very common, but there have been many, many cases that dismissed in the federal courts because the government has committed Brady violations. And there are Brady violations by the truckload in this particular case. It's coming out clear. So Sidney Powell was brought in. She replaced Covington and Burling. Judge Gleason, retired Judge Gleason, was appointed to file this amicus brief with the court. It's interesting that he is a partner at the firm Debevoise and Plimpton in Washington, D.C., who is the attorney that represented the Sally Yates that Sidney Powell mentioned, who was the one who shut down the inspector general when she was working. And she's the great protector of everybody's rights. So now her attorney is now going to be presenting something to the court. And it's interesting when you look at the brief that Sidney Powell filed and the defense team filed, they did not mention this case that was just decided last Thursday, May 7th or 8th, a unanimous Supreme Court decision in the case of U.S. versus Sinning, Smith. Justice Ginsburg wrote the opinion. So here is you want to talk about the end times, John Haller citing Justice Ginsburg opinion with approval. And essentially what Justice Ginsburg and the entire court provided in the Sonnenberg case was that the court should not be asking for these amicus briefs to be filed, this friend of the court briefs, that the only people that are really should be involved in the case are the litigants. Now, this case involved an immigration law. Of course, all the immigration law groups were wanting to get their say in the court, even though they were not a party to the case. So what happened was that there were 3 groups. There were immigration law firms, activists, left-wing law firms, and were given opportunity to file amicus briefs in that case. And they had not filed anything in the lower court, the district court. It was on appeal at the Ninth Circuit. And we all know, we can all make comments about the Ninth Circuit and some of the crazy things that go on there. So what happened was that at the Ninth Circuit, it was bad enough that in the oral argument that was going to take place in front of the Ninth Circuit, The activist groups were given 20 minutes to argue their position, even though they were not a party to the case. And the defendant who had a lot at stake, the defendant's freedom is at stake, the defendant was given 10 minutes to argue in front of the Ninth Circuit. Well, the Supreme Court said, this is nonsense. And in her ruling, Justice Ginsburg correctly noted the appeals panel departed so drastically from the principle of party presentation as to constitute an abuse of discretion. And they went in, and she noted this: in short, courts are essentially passive instruments of government. They do not, should not sally forth each day looking for wrongs to right. They wait for cases to come to them. And when cases arise, courts normally decide only questions presented by the parties. And that's true. The Wall Street Journal noted the 9-0 ruling doesn't bode well for Judge Sullivan on appeal, and it makes us wonder if in his rage at the prosecution, he has lost his legal and maybe emotional bearings. And this is something I've said over and over again, that the pursuit of justice has very often become, in the United States courts, because of the way our culture is and this adoption of postmodern thought and thinking that my truth, your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth, you can't criticize my truth, that people appeal to feelings. There was also a D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals case, the Fokker Services case that was decided a number of years ago that cites this. And it's interesting that the Flynn defense team did not cite the Supreme Court case when they made their filing on Tuesday, because the decision had just come out the previous Thursday or Friday, and they may not even have been aware of it. But Judge Sullivan has been on the bench for a long time, and he's dismissed cases for similar things. So in that case, the Fokker Services case, what they had was a deferred prosecution agreement. And the court decided, well, we don't really like the deferred prosecution agreement. We think that this should go forward. And the D.C. Circuit, which is the circuit which governs the court in which Judge Sullivan sits, said, nonsense. They don't have any interest in the case. The judge and amicus and all these other people, they don't have any interest in the case. They shouldn't be heard. So I think eventually this will happen. But again, here's General Flynn just twisting in the wind. I mean, he could have been, the other alternative he has is he could get pardoned by the president, but for whatever reason, the president has not done that yet. But it's a fiasco. But I think it shows sort of the scandalous, lawless behavior of people at the highest levels of our government. And that ought to be concerning. And it is rampant. And now there are other people trying to intervene in the case, and who knows what Judge Sullivan's going to do. But let's hope that General Flynn, and I'm not saying General Flynn is a choir boy, he's made some mistakes in the way he's dealt with some things, I think, but, you don't prosecute people for making mistakes. You could prosecute people for committing crimes. And from what I've seen, nothing happens here. So let's just look a little bit at what's going on. Have a little comments about the COVID thing. I think I see a lot of COVID fatigue going on out there. But I think one of the big deals, one of the very important things about what's happened is the worldwide economic collapse. I don't think you would have very difficult time convincing me that the world is not in a depression. I think the world is in a depression, economic depression at this time. And the Fed chief came out, Mr. Powell, and said that to expect a long downturn, that it's not going to come back quickly without more aid. And the Fed has already pumped trillions of dollars into this thing. National debt has risen, and it's not hard to see a scenario in which the national debt, which used to bother everybody, will have gone up by 75% in just a couple of months, and it was already at $20 trillion. Even the Financial Times notes that extra stimulus is needed, but people are warning about the debt load. And part of the problem we had was the world was this great economy that everybody wanted to point to was fueled by debt, huge corporate debt, levels of corporate debt never seen before. We never learned the lessons of the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Fed kept pumping money in, and the fundamentals were all wrong, and eventually that bubble's going to burst. We don't know exactly how it's going to burst, but it's clear that it has burst now. The Fed issued a report this week, their financial stability report, really just goes to, but they say the most cited potential shocks over the next 12 to 18 months, COVID-19, efficacy of global policy response, corporate debt, credit cycle turn, U.S. election, market structure, geopolitical risks, household consumer debt. All of this stuff is exploding, and they're just ranking them as to what they think is the most likely cause. Note up here at the top where it says, finally, geopolitical tensions were cited frequently as a medium to long-term risk. A few contacts noted that the COVID-19 outbreak could amplify tensions and accelerate a shift away from multilateralism. Respondents also highlighted the risk of heightened trade tensions and the possibility that the virus and its fallout could accelerate global leadership changes and amplify political uncertainty. And that's true. There are a lot of political careers that are at great risk. I see, even as the medical part seems to be getting more under control, manageable, they developed some new treatments. They figured out maybe some of the things they thought how they were going to treat this virus and the severe complications that come to a very small percentage of people, but that are very severe that were, the fear was they're going to overwhelm the acute care facilities, and in some places they did. But as that sort of seems to be in a manageable state, the one thing that you don't see is you don't see these governors walking anything back. Governor Newsom out in California, Mayor of Los Angeles, Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania, and elsewhere, they're talking about long-term lockdowns, and there are all sorts of things that are being done. My particular concern is this bill, H.R. 6666, the TRACE Act, that is to set up people to trace contacts and that type of thing, but opening the door to people coming in people's homes, and there's huge Fourth Amendment issues. I don't know if it'll pass. It's in committee right now in the House of Representatives, but you can be sure that the House of Representatives is going to pass that particular bill. But Governor Wolf, particularly, I saw some quotes of him the other day. I don't have a copy of him here, but he was just talking about we're going to do these really severe draconian lockdowns, and it's wild out there. I was trying to buy some meat at the store the other night, and the lady for 5 minutes, she was looking at 3 packages of meat, so I stood my social distance. And I finally asked her, I said, could I help you, or could I get you some help? And she turned around and leashed into a tirade with me. And it was, it was pretty unbelievable, but everybody's like on a knife's edge out there. And I think it's going to be a problem. But the things that are happening, stores, factories hit by lockdown, retail sales way down, industrial orders way down. Germany is descending into a recession. Everything seems to be falling apart. For example, change in retail sales from a year earlier. In clothing, those sales are down 89%. These are numbers that nobody has ever seen before, even in the Great Depression back in the late 20s, early 30s. Furniture and furnishings, 66%. Electronics and appliances, 65%. Health and personal care, down 10%. And that's one of the other problems that they have is that a lot of malls, strip centers, retail businesses and stuff they're never going to open again. Here's an example. Retail and food service sales. In April alone, they were down 16%. You can see that at the height of the 2008 to 2009 recession, they were down about 4%. So the decline is over 4 times greater in just 1 month. Supply chain problems, you can read all about that. I know I went to one of the local big box discount warehouse stores, and meat that was $7.99 a pound is now $12.99 a pound. And they said, it was Costco, and they said, look, we're just passing along what we're getting from our suppliers. So there are people trying to shift supply chains and everything, some very innovative things being done, but it's going to be disruptive for a while. And some of these meat processing plants are concerned about reconfiguring the workspace so people don't get sick. And it is a legitimate concern, I think, of particularly in that particular factory type setting where people are very shoulder to shoulder, that they have to reconfigure things. And but when they do that, it reduces the capacity of everything. Over time, I'd stop at Burger King every now and then and get something. And so we like their milkshake. So maybe once a week we'll go get a Burger King milkshake. And he said, I don't have any. I said, well, when are you getting them? And he goes, this was a week ago. I'm out of 22 items on my menu today. And I'm told by my supply people at Burger King, I'm not getting anything for 10 weeks at least. So I don't even know if that fast food chain will stay open. I saw that 20% of Wendy's were out of hamburger. So this is a huge problem. Job losses are way up. We've gone up to about 35 million over the last 6 weeks. One of the countries that's cited often is Sweden. That Sweden didn't really lock down. They did put some restrictions in place, shouldn't get together in groups greater than 50. But people stayed home. They left elementary and middle schools open, but they shut secondary schools. And there were some issues. Their death rate was higher. It's still, a small percentage of the overall population, but their death rate was higher than Finland and Norway and some other countries. But the other thing, too, though, is you can look at the trend for retail and recreation. They have here Sweden compared to Norway, I think is one of the gray lines. And you can see that their activity, everybody went down. And so even Sweden, which did not shut down as much or very little, they've still had a bad economic performance, very similar to all the countries around them. It says here, the Swedish central bank predicts the country's GDP will contract by 7 to 10% this year, an estimate on par with the rest of Europe. The EU Commission says EU economy will contract by 7.5%. I think those are optimistic numbers. Another thing that's happened, and this is kind of sort of one of the inexplicable things, there are a lot of theories out there as to why this happened, is healthcare. Healthcare was essentially shut down. Everything was devoted to this coronavirus. They didn't set up other proceedings. And so what's happened is, small medical offices are struggling. They haven't had any revenue for a couple of months. They're starting to open up. And, now you go. I went to the dentist the other day, and you got to get your temperature checked, and you have to sign these papers and these waivers. And they have this little isolation pod where you got to go before they let you go back to get your dentist, your teeth cleaned or whatever. But so hospitals are struggling. Even the Mayo Clinic this year is predicted to lose close to $1 billion. Last year, the net earnings for the Mayo Clinic were about $1 billion. So they've gone from $1 billion earnings to $1 billion in losses in just 1 year. And part of it was because of the way all of this was shut down. Another thing that they're talking about, the end of office. This is from the Wall Street Journal, I think yesterday. And they're saying, everybody is looking at this. Do we really need a big office where everybody comes to work? And so this has a ripple effect. So I know of cases where landlord or tenants have been leasing 10,000 square feet of commercial office space. They're going to the landlord. They're saying, listen, we're never paying you rent again. Our revenue is down, but we'll rent 1,000 square feet at a reduced rate. But, multiply that by many different types of businesses that are cutting back 50, 40, 80%, 90% on the office space that they need. And that has a ripple effect through the commercial real estate market. So people are predicting big declines in commercial real estate up to 40%. And that might be somewhat optimistic. This does not resolve quickly. Even if everything opens back up tomorrow, there's a lot of bad things going on. So it's this concatenation, it's this convergence of all these interconnected things that have these ripple effects. And then that ripple effect affects these and creates ripple effects of its own. It's really, I don't think it's anything like I've ever seen or anybody has ever seen. There's also this talk about and this is where I mentioned earlier, I was concerned about the Trace Act and the mindset behind this. Now, there's a federal Trace Act that there is proposed. It's in committee, as I mentioned, H.R. 6666. I don't know if it'll pass. It would have to pass the House, would have to pass the Senate, and would have to be signed into law by President Trump. I don't know what will happen or how quickly, but you need to understand that that's a federal act, and each state gets to determine how they're going to act. And so you're going to have a lot of these governors who seem to be very enamored with themselves and their models and that type of thing. And even as the crisis on the medical side seems to be declining, they're keeping all these restrictions in place. And that's always the problem, they never, when you lose something, it's very, very difficult to get it back. So who knows exactly what's going to happen? They've talked about apps. There's some questions of whether the apps would really be that effective. So they're hiring contract tracers, these people to follow you around. They're turning people into snitches about neighbors. I forget where it was, old couple, they were sitting on their front porch, and people reported them to the police. It's all very bizarre. President Trump has talked about a vaccine. We're going to get it done. We're going to get it done quickly. But now even experts are saying, I don't think it's going to happen. When Fauci testified in front of Congress the other day, he said, he thought they would get a vaccine, but he didn't know how quickly it would come. And then he made a couple of comments that were, one, there's no guarantee that the vaccine is actually going to be effective when we get it. And he also talked about the fact that the vaccine might actually cause somebody to get something when they're infected with this again, they would have a worse reaction because of the vaccine. So my personal view is right now is with the opposition to this, I don't know that there will ever be a vaccine, but regardless of what the federal government does, you have all these state governments and local governments and departments of health and all these various states that they're doing what they want regardless of what the federal government says. So this is a huge problem, and it is impacting liberty. And it is one of these things that regardless of how the virus originated, how it spread, whether it was intentional, unintentional, lab created, not lab created, the fact of the matter is, look, there was a problem, but everything fell under the rubric, never let a crisis go to waste. And there were a lot of people with with similar but different agendas that rushed in to fill the space. I've showed you pictures of the World Economic Forum, which rolled out or populated and continues to populate its website, the strategic intelligence part of its website, with hyperlinks and videos and articles and that type of thing. I'll cite one of those in a moment. And so if you want to know what the people that want to have global governance want to have happen, go check out that website. It's available largely for free, and you can track and you can find out what they're thinking and what they're saying, what they're analyzing it. And some of the information is actually good, solid information, but they're using it to further their globalist agenda. And in the other category of never let a project go to waste, Project Syndicate, the World's Opinion page, there's a magazine, and the title of the article is The Crisis of a Lifetime. And the title of the article is based on a quote from the interview that they conducted with George Soros. And we all know what Soros is about. And in it, he was asked, "You have seen many crises, Mr. Soros. Is the COVID-19 pandemic comparable to any previous one?" And Soros said this: "No. This is the crisis of my lifetime." Now, this is a man who's 90 years old, roughly 90 years old. He lived in World War II, had some pretty shady things, I think, that he did in World War II. So here he is saying, this is the crisis of my lifetime. Even before the pandemic hit, I realized that we were in a revolutionary moment where what would be impossible or even inconceivable in normal times had become not only possible, but probably absolutely necessary. Now, when Soros says something like this is pretty frightening. And he concludes, "And then came COVID-19, which has totally disrupted people's lives and required very different behavior. It is an unprecedented event that probably has never occurred in this combination. And it really endangers the survival of our civilization." He was asked then this: "Will this crisis change the nature of capitalism? Even before COVID-19 led to the current catastrophic recession, the downsides of globalization and free trade were attracting greater attention." Soros responded, "We will not go back to where we were before when the pandemic started." Let me say that again. "We will not go back to where we were when the pandemic started. That is pretty certain. But that is the only thing that is certain. Everything else is up for grabs. I do not think anybody knows how capitalism will evolve, even in the European Union." And one of the theories about the final beast empire is that it comes from some reconstitution of the revived Roman Empire in the European Union. And it's very interesting that there's some things going on in the EU right now. So just as here in the state of Ohio, I think our governor cut close to $800 million out of the state budget. This is a huge number, which will impact people who work for the state, programs that they have on many, many different levels. The same thing is happening to state governments all over the place. Some of the states are exploring getting a law change in Congress to allow them to file for bankruptcy because they are bankrupt. They have no revenue coming in. Everything is down. They get a lot of money for roads repair from gas taxes. Well, gas usage is down 40 to 60% or more. And who knows when it's going to rebound. So in the EU, this is also happening with governments, and particularly the governments that fund the EU. Now, the EU is really pretty much over from at least its former form as of just a few months ago. You have the situation where the UK has withdrawn from the EU. That's sort of still in process, and there's a lot of things going on about that. You have revenues going down. When Italy and Spain had problems, the Northern European countries, which have a better economy, really didn't step in to help. And so there are questions as to whether Italy and Spain will continue to be part of the EU. But the other problem that they have, and this is sort of based on an article by Olli Rehn, who was one of the economic advisors of the EU, walking the high wire. But within the EU elites establishment, they are talking about the fact that the EU dream may be over. And one of the ways that this one article, Reuters says, though the book, Walking the High Wire, was written before the coronavirus outbreak, the pandemic has revived debates about sharing financial burdens among its members. Reluctance to support weaker countries suggests Rein's vision remains out of reach. Rein was advocating, we can keep this together, we can keep this together. The Economist has an article this week, and the cover says, "Goodbye Globalization, the Dangerous Lure of Self-Sufficiency." One of the articles in there is, "The COVID-19 pandemic puts pressure on the EU." Listen to what it says. And this is kind of interesting from a prophecy standpoint as to how quickly, how rapidly everything has changed. Here's what the article in The Economist says. In January, Brussels was an optimistic place. The European Union had survived a decade that included the near collapse of the bloc's currency, a refugee crisis, and its second largest economy, Britain, voting to leave. For the first time in years, officials had time to think of the future rather than clear up the messes of the past. Then 120,000 people died. A bloc that prided itself on removing borders, the scars of history, in the words of Joseph Borrell, the European Commission's foreign policy chief, reintroduced them in chaos. Commuters were stranded at Poland's borders with both Lithuania and Germany, some of them for days. And one of the other areas is there's been this push by Macron and Merkel to create a European defense force. The Reuters articles and other articles I read about this week, just came out Friday, really, say there is no funding for the European Defense Force. So if this is part of Bible prophecy, it looks like, there's going to be a delay in some of these things coming together. So I'm not sure I agree that this is where the final beast empire comes from, but it's certainly in my basket of possibilities. And by the way, that raises another point with regard to Daniel and what Daniel says about, in the end, when this is unsealed, the wise will understand and instruct many. I think it is very dangerous for people like me. And when I talk about this stuff, I'm always pointing my finger at myself. I'm always checking what I'm saying against what's really going on and the way I analyze it. And I listen to a lot of people that I don't agree with, by the way, on everything. But I think it's very dangerous to be incredibly dogmatic that this is the way Bible prophecy is going to be filled. This vaccine, things that they're talking about, this is the mark of the beast. I think we need to be very careful about that. I see a lot of extrapolations made. I see a lot of people have sometimes pick any topic in Bible prophecy. You don't agree with me, even though the book hasn't been totally unsealed yet, and we're not there. But you got to agree with me, or you're not as holy as I am, and that type of thing. And I think it's really. My concern is it's causing tremendous division in the body of Christ, as a lot of people run around triumphantly stating their particular position. And I also think that there is a lot of, look, I'm concerned about these things. I'm concerned about a vaccine. I'm concerned. I actually believe Fauci when he said that if there is a vaccine, it may actually lead to worse problems than what we're trying to solve. So, and it's always interesting, people cite Fauci when they agree with him, and they think he's the false prophet or the Antichrist when they don't agree with him. But listen, I think what he said in there was a valid concern about rushing this vaccine out to everybody. There's also questions about whether the vaccine can be forced on people. In the school context, there's an old U.S. case, Jackson versus U.S., I think it is, from 1905, a Supreme Court case. And that case said, yeah, we can make vaccinations mandatory for school attendance. So people that want to force the vaccine on people, they'll cite the Jackson case and they'll say, see, we can force you to do this. We can force you to take the vaccine. Now, I think they're going to have to put in legislation. It's going to have to go through committee. It's going to have to go through the House, the Senate. It may have to be done on the state levels. I just don't see it coming together all that quickly. But I could be wrong. It could come together very quickly. But at least right now, the way I would interpret the law in the United States is that the forced vaccination or mandatory vaccination thing is, it is. I just don't think that it's going to happen right now. Nevertheless, I see people out there saying this is the mark of the beast, or this will certainly be the mark of the beast. And I think that's a very unwise thing to do when we don't know for sure what the mark of the beast here, particularly since there is no beast. I think we can all agree on some certainties in life these days. One certainty is that Jesus is coming back. Another certainty is that the Antichrist is not here yet. Another certainty of life now is that nobody ever changes their mind in a discussion on Facebook. And this is sort of one of my hopes is, and again, I'm pointing the finger at myself, is that your Facebook and other posts will be reviewed at the Bema Seat judgment. So need to keep that in mind. And, you know, it's very easy. Everybody's tense and everybody's responding angrily. So when we get to these things, and I think people need to be very careful to be accurate. I got a fair amount of heat recently where I said I did not think that this was the mark of the beast. And people were like, oh, it is the mark of the beast. It is the mark of the beast. You just don't understand. They're microchipping us. And I'm like, so on the quantum dot tattoo thing, I see that it's nanochips that they're injecting into you. I've read the technical paper, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but the technical paper that describes what they're doing, it's a dye. It's not a nanochip. It's deposited in a pattern so they can determine that you had or did not have a particular vaccination. Doesn't have all your personal information tied into it. And the other thing, and this is just, maybe I'm a crazy lawyer, this is the way I think, because we have to always consider arguments. And I see people say, this vaccine you won't be able to buy or sell. Well, okay, you have the burden to prove that you won't be able to buy or sell if you don't get the vaccine. Can you sit at home and order from Amazon and have the groceries delivered to your house? That would seem to be that you're able to buy and sell without this vaccine. So I think there's some things, there's more to it. This is certainly setting the stage, but I don't think we're there where people should be saying, this is that which was prophesied. This is the mark of the beast. And I think the other thing in Daniel, it says there will be men who will understand. The plural, not going to be one individual person. And I think we need to read articles very carefully. I saw a number of articles where they were talking about a company that was going to put together pre-filled syringes, plastic syringes, and along with the one option with the pre-filled syringe would be an RFID chip that would allow them to track where the vaccination was given. This is what the technical paper said when you read it. And immediately I saw a whole bunch of articles being written. They're going to inject us with RFID chips when they give us the vaccine. And that's not what the article said. So I really think that we can be concerned about this. I certainly am. But we also need to be people of truth so that we do not end up losing our credibility. So that's just sort of my comments today on COVID, the economic crisis. We are in a very serious economic situation, and you see things where people are concerned about mental health is going to be a problem. And now people are coming out with their models, just like there were models on how many people would die from COVID. Now they're going to talk about how many people will die from suicide or something else because of the economic downturn. So remember that it's the same people making up the models about COVID deaths that are making up the models about deaths from suicide and the economic depression. But we have a major problem. It is clear Sweden, US, UK, Italy, Spain. There's a city on the coast in Ecuador where there has been this enormous spike in deaths. And I'm not saying they're all COVID related. They may be COVID crisis related because people aren't getting health care. But I'm talking death rates like I think in this city on the coast in Ecuador, death rates are up 400%. And so this needs to be explained. I mean, this is reality. It's happening in New York. It's happening in the UK, where there's this enormous spike in deaths. So, and again, not saying they're all COVID related. I think a lot of them are, but I think it's a lot of this because we shut down the healthcare system and people aren't getting the care that they need. And it may be that people are stressing out too, and that's causing a lot of the problem. I think it's one of these things where we're not going to know for a while as to exactly what the impact of all of this was. So that's sort of my comments. Just a few more comments on some things. I always start these things, I think they're going to be short. I'm not sure what happens between that thought and the reality. Anyway, here's a report. This is from the Times of London. U.S. would lose any war fought with China in the Pacific. This is based on reports that the Times of London got from people who are participated in Pentagon-sponsored war games as to what was going on. This is a troubling thing, especially when I think you can make a very plausible case that we are in the midst of an economic war with China right now because of the way things are going on. So this is a big problem. Obama gutted the Navy and other parts of the defense establishment, and now we're paying the price. And I think that we live at a very tenuous time. I'm glad I'm not in charge. I'm glad I just get to sit here and cherry pick, when I disagree with people. Here's an interesting report. This comes from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. And this report just published, Progress Report on the Response in the Greater Horn of Africa and Yemen. And it's about the locust outbreak and how they're responding to it economically. And they have a very convenient map there about how the locust plague is spreading. Seems to have died down a little bit, but they're having an excess amount of rain this year. They're even saying that Jordan could have some impact later, could be threatened. And part of the problem, though, is the chemicals and whatever that they would use to fight against the locusts are not getting to the places where there are the locusts. So they're expecting greater than normal rain, which means when harvest season comes, there will be another batch of locusts that will be hatching at harvest time. And so this compounds the world food crisis. So now they're talking, several hundred million people at extreme risk because of lack of food. And what's happening, the reason they're not getting the things to where they need to be is because the supply chains are just totally disrupted and broken. So much so, in fact, this is a report from Vox. An unintended crisis, COVID-19 restrictions hit sea transportation. And as this notes, almost 80% of trade is carried by sea. It's one of the reasons why the United States, because we're able to use water transportation and our river system in the middle of the country, has been, as one person in geography described it, as the inevitable empire. And here's just sort of a graphic of the different shipping lanes of the world. They go through some choke points and that sort of thing. If you've ever been to the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, you see these massive stacks of containers that come in. And I'm always sort of viewed modern shipping and supply chains as a bit of a miracle, logistical miracle, that they're able to put. I had a case involving counterfeit tennis shoes one time. They were coming from South Korea, and they're put in containers, and they end up at all these different stores all over the United States. And if you ever seen the maze and stacks of stuff that are out there in Los Angeles and Long Beach, you know that there are many other ports like this. It's incredible that they're able to put all of that together. We have a rail yard here not too far from where I live on the west side of Columbus, and they have the trains, and there's millions and millions and millions of dollars of goods that go through that rail yard as they come in on a train, they're put on another train, and they're shipped here. It's amazing to me that it's a modern miracle. But back to the shipping crisis, this article on Vox says, is the current crisis different? It certainly is unprecedented in that it attacks the shipping industry on two fronts at the same time. Besides a steep contraction in demand, the industry is also faced with regulatory constraints disrupting its operations on almost all ports. The detrimental effects of local disruptions are multiplied as they spread through the network of interconnected shipping lines. The decline in shipping is affecting all sorts of supply chains, as I mentioned, including the one on how to respond to locusts. It's also causing problems. The drop in oil prices means less revenue for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is then having to cut back. Somebody said that the Saudi 2030 agenda or 2030 goals that they had, Vision 2030 is what Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, called it, is now Vision maybe never. But they're still pursuing it. In Saudi Arabia, they're smart. The oil prices are down. They don't have the revenue, but what they're doing is they're taking money from their sovereign wealth fund and they're going out and buying all sorts of companies to come up. Michael Stevens, a Middle East analyst at the Royal United Service Institute in London, said Saudi Arabia is facing the hardest time it's ever been through. And that is a country that plays into Bible prophecy. We also have the situation in Syria. This was an interview that was on RT the other day with a person in the Syrian government. And he was talking about the conflict that's developing between Assad and Russia. This interview RT eventually took down, but there's been a flurry of editorials and opinion pieces and articles in the Syrian press and the Russian press going after Syria, the Syrian press going after Russia. So the relationship there is very tenuous. Russia, I think, is concerned that they got involved in this, thinking they're going to get the contract to rebuild a devastated country. But now nobody wants to contribute to the rebuilding effort because of the Assad regime and the corruption that's there, and people, why do we dump money into something that we know is just going to be stolen? Al-Sharq al-Aswad, which is a Arabic language newspaper published in London, has a number of articles on the front page. They talk about the rift developing between Russia and Syria. There was a Syrian MP who actually wrote on his Facebook page. He talked about the lion's anger at Putin, meaning that Assad is the lion. Russia's intervention in the Syrian conflict achieved joint Syrian-Russian interests in confronting the United States. The intervention did not save the regime, as Moscow has repeatedly claimed at various formal events, continued the MP. This member of parliament, Khalid Aboud, alleged that if Assad were to become angry, he can then pull the rug right out from under Putin, even in the Kremlin. Assad can dash all of Putin's glory and accomplishments. He warned that Syria can drown Putin in a long conflict in the Latakia Mountains, Haran, or the Syrian desert, describing the Russian troops as occupation forces. These are quotes from his Facebook page. Translated, if Assad wanted to stand against Putin, the Russian president would not only be defeated in Syria, but Russia's expansion throughout the world will be curbed and Putin's name will be forever crossed out from Russian history. Another article by the U.S. envoy in that region, Envoy Jeffrey, said this: Russia is fed up with Assad and is showing flexibility to cooperate with us, meaning the U.S. Russia not getting the big contracts that it expected. Syria doesn't really have many resources. They have some oil, but of course the oil price is down, so that's not really worth anything. And remember, this has been kind of a tricky relationship. This was Vladimir Putin arriving at this air base in Syria back in December. I can't remember if it was December 2018 or December 2017. And he was welcome. And the interesting thing is, if you watch the video here, you'll see how Putin views Assad. So here he is meeting Assad. And then Putin is going to go to the podium and speak. And so here's Assad. Assad is going to he's going to tag along with Putin. And so here you see, this is kind of an interesting thing. Here's Assad coming, and he gets in. There's the Russian general who grabs his arm and says, no, buddy, this is Vladimir's moment, and you don't get to participate. And Russia has been, they've been in an expansionist mode in terms of influence. This is a graphic from the Institute for the Study of War, understandingwar.org, that shows all of the different places that Russia has entered into agreements between 2014 and today. Very interesting thing. Just a few more comments and I'll be finished up here. This is an air base in eastern Syria, or a base underground that Iran is building in eastern Syria. There have been some attacks there. They continue pushing forward on this. There's been a lot of talk about annexation. David Friedman says, look, Israel has to commit to negotiating. Now, King Abdullah of Jordan has come out and said that annexation would spark a massive conflict with Jordan. Jerusalem Post piece on the front page this morning says the U.S. cools on annexation after Jordan warns of massive confrontation. I'm not sure that. I have to study that a bit more. Here's Al God. This is the Jordanian daily. And this is talking about this is a King Abdullah's response. And if you go back and you look at King Abdullah, he's very, he's considered the keeper of the Temple Mount area in Jerusalem, the holy sites. And he always talks about, well, we need to respect Arab, Muslim, and Christian rights. He never mentions Jewish rights in regard to any of that. So I say don't be misled by King Abdullah, because he's not very honest in the way he pursues this. Finally, this. Well, let me talk about this for just a moment. This is an article in Foreign Affairs talking about the Two-State Delusion. Let me just pull a quote out there. They have someone who supports the two-state solution, and they have Michael Doran, who responds. And in his response to the person who's supporting the two-state, he says this. He says that, look, we need to keep things in context, and he doesn't think that there will ever be a two-state solution. One of his comments is this. For the two-state solution to become viable, Hamas must collapse, Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank must craft a shared vision of the future, and then they must march in lockstep towards a compromise with Israel. The number of stars that must align for this vision to become reality is too great to count. Now, this is interesting how this plays into Bible prophecy. We don't know exactly what this covenant is. We know that Israel has made many agreements with Arabs in the past. They did it with Sadat. They did it with Arafat. They've done it with Jordan. So I think that this confirmation of the covenant that starts the 70th week will be something related along this, but we don't know exactly what it is right now. And it's one of these things that you can't be dogmatic about it. You just need to watch and see. And then someplace, at some point, I think the wise who understand will be able to say, this is that which was prophesied. I just don't think that we're there yet. There's been a lot. Now, one of the other things that happened this week was this. It took place in Dubai. Religious leaders mark International Day of Prayer with call for peace during the pandemic. And remember, the Pope went there February of 2019, signed this agreement with a imam who runs Al-Azhar University, the largest Muslim Sunni university in the world, that's located in Cairo. That's where Obama did his speech, June 4th, 2009, where I think he sort of invited the Arab Spring to start. He sort of triggered or alluded to the fact that he would support this. But now, Dubai is pushing this interfaith prayer thing. And the Pope supported this. And this is no sound here, but this little video that they put together about the responding to the call of the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity. This is something that the Pope is pushing. He issued some things for the initiative of Pray for Humanity. Various representatives of faiths in the United Arab Emirates have united to ardently supplicate to God with prayers. All different religions praying to end this pandemic. So you have these different people. You have Muslim, different sects of Islam, different countries. You'll see they have Buddhists, they have Jewish, they have Christians. Everybody praying to for the unity of humanity. I think this is a fairly significant thing that's taking place in the world. Here's I think a Lutheran bishop talking about this. And so they had this unity prayer. Here's a president of the Jewish community of the Emirates participated. And I think the next person up is a Buddhist. Yes. Purify one's mind through meditation and spreading of loving kindness to all sentient beings of this. We also be praying for the peace and prosperity of the world. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor, both in this world and the world to come. You see how this unity of religions is coming about, and people are pushing it. And evangelicals are even, in some cases, participating in this. So this is another significant thing that happened this week. So that's really all I have, but it's a very interesting time that we live. The world is, as I said, the world is all messed up. One thing that's certain, though, is that Jesus is coming back, and we can rest in the hope of that Jesus will come back and Jesus will set it right. In the meantime, we should be sharing the gospel with our friends and neighbors. We can explain to them. We can use this as a way to introduce them to the gospel that Jesus came to earth, lived a perfect life, born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, and was crucified for our sins on the cross in full payment for those sins, was buried and rose again the third day, ascended to heaven, is coming back. All of those things are important parts of the gospel, and that is what gets people saved. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. Pray that you will bless us this week. Pray that you will help us to be exemplary examples of people filled with your Spirit, speaking the truth in love, and give us opportunities to share the gospel with others this week. In Jesus' name, amen.